The episode here is a special Q&A session with Evan Graczyk and Bob Bell from Woodfin. This is a follow-up to the webinar that they did the other day. You can find the full webinar recording in the episode just preceding this. You might want to listen to the webinar before you listen to the Q&A. Either way, thank you for listening. If there's anything you want to learn about KaiNexus, you can go to our website at www.kainexus.com. That's KAINEXUS.com. Hi, everybody. Mark Raven from KaiNexus here. We've got time today to do a little bonus Q&A following up the webinar that Evan Graczyk and Bob Bell presented recently. You can find that hour-long video either just previous in the podcast feed, or you can also find it on the YouTube channel, and I will link to the full webinar session in the show notes. So the first, we've got three questions we're going to touch on here today. The first that was submitted during the webinar is, how do you ensure that leaders don't focus solely on bottom line savings?
That's like the ultimate question of continuous improvement. So I would say one of the things we get into with small improvements is trying to help them understand how they compound. And so one of the things we constantly talk about is, if I can save 30 minutes a week, if I can find some activities in my teams that can save 30 minutes a week, then that builds on itself. In a year, you'll have 26 hours of time that you can use to be productive that you do not have. We do not focus a great deal on ROI, and I'm a finance guy by nature, and that's one of those things that we intentionally did up front. We stayed away from it, and I think the simplest way I would say it, if I was talking to a manager, would you want 12 people who actually are punching the clock and doing what you tell them, or would you want 12 people that are constantly trying to find better ways to do things and are focused on customer experience as well as benefiting themselves and the company? And it's hard to put a value on that. That's not a great financial value of that, and it's hard to measure the impact that that has on a business. But I think we're believers that if you actually give people the tools and are patient, because everybody has a different learning cycle, everybody has a different background experience, that it will pay off in the long run in customer experience and all these things that are very hard to measure. And one other side note I'll say to that is, in trying to attach an ROI, the amount of time spent trying to formulate that versus moving on to more improvement is also one of those things that we're considering when we do this. A lot of the operators' biggest objection is the time investment of their people. I mean, this should be doing it. If we added ROI modules and having people calculate those things, that would also add a tremendous amount of time to literally the time they're spending doing the administrative function of continuous improvement versus focusing on continuous improvement. So, Evan, you have anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said, I totally agree with. It's a constant conversation that we have with managers, especially when things get a little bit tighter, when things get busy, and we don't have a lot of extra capacity within our team. So we give ample preparation, ample notice of the expectations that are set within the idea network. And that's, dedicating time each week to a meeting and then carrying out action items. So, just having that manager involved from the start and keeping that open line of communication with them is really our strategy right now. But as Bob said, once we start to develop those ROI metrics and get a little bit more comfortable with the problem solving process, we can start to really justify it to the managers through numbers. I think that'll paint a really good picture. That'll help a lot. But like Bob said, we've really been trying to focus on just training out the process so we can get comfortable with it. And then in the next couple of years, this year starting, we're going to be focusing more on the quality of the items that we work.
And we do focus on time savings. I would say if there's a metric we use, I mean, it's not something that you can look at and say, oh, they saved 3.6 hours a week doing this. But we do try to get people to be cognizant of the fact that the way you can break even on time is to get time savings items that will help your team actually do things faster. And that way, the time you're investing actually comes back.
Right.
Yeah, one side note, 3M, I think back in wasn't that the 70s that they spent 5% of their employee time was bent to come up with creative ideas, actually innovation, more so than improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And with this, we talked about an hour and a half out of 40 hours, 3.3%. So we got 1.6 left, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But then, the problem is, let's say a cost cutter then comes in and says, well, I'm going to eliminate that discretionary time. But then, well, what's the cost? What's the loss of not doing that? Some of these things are not as straightforward as a simple return on investment calculation, like money earning interest back when money would earn interest in the bank. Or if we try to put everything in the dollar terms, let's say a hospital or a health system reduces patient waiting time by 20 minutes. What's that worth? Is that a good thing to do? Probably. I mean, so some of these things are not directly related. Someone might say, well, if the patients are happier, they're less likely to leave our practice. But that's different than a simple ROI calculation, I think.
Yeah. Well, and you have quality aspects to it as well, the customer experience. I mean, there's so many things that can benefit this. I will say, when we first started talking, and this is an ongoing battle. I mean, you're constantly trying to improve and get mindsets improving and doing things. But if executed properly, and you really do have an environment where everybody's participating and coming up with ways to make their lives better and the customer experience better, I mean, what's the value of less turnover, right? Because people actually they feel like they're appreciated in their job, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that come along positively with this that you really just can't easily slap a number on and say that's that.
Well, there's one hospital CEO that we had quoted in our book, Healthcare Kaizen, who said, the only ROI I'm ever looking at adding up is reducing voluntary turnover.
Right.
That is a simple number, and the cost of replacing and rehiring can be estimated. And so if you're cutting that from average for the healthcare industry to something, if you dramatically better, the CEO, I think I'm paraphrasing, he said, that's ROI enough. The rest of it it's not even worth trying to calculate. We know it's just the right thing. And I think it's funny on the flip side, nobody ever asked, well, what's the ROI of not engaging people? Like, right. why is it we have to prove the ROI for something that's different than what might be the default?
Well, I think I might have mentioned before, there was a CEO question, what if we train our people and they leave us? And his question was, what if we don't train them and they stay, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's legit. But I just think there's far too much positive potential outcome. We're new. So to be honest, with turnover calculations, that's tough because we've changed the environment. So when you're a year and a half, 2 years in, people are still adjusting to the change of now being part of something where they have to do different tasks. So, and even early on, it's hard to measure that because is it the change? Long term, will it be better?
Right.
It's difficult.
And turnover is affected by external factors like the economy or a pandemic. Right. And that's not even.
Exactly. Yeah. COVID did not help either. Exactly.
I mean, it kind of relates back to the small ideas, and really what focusing on small ideas allows us to do is there usually when we implement those solutions, the impact of it is pretty obvious. People know what they're stepping over every day, and then they know what they no longer have to. So the most important thing to me would be that the individual that's sustaining these changes, that's leading these improvements, is seeing the payoff of their work. We mentioned a win-win-win. The customer wins, the employee wins, and then the company wins. To me, we're about sustaining. We're rolling this out, training people how to do it. But we need them to buy into it internally. So if they can see their wins, which small problems allow them to do a lot of it easier, then the ROI kind of falls by the wayside a little bit. It's a constant conversation.
Yeah, and one other thing. Sorry, this is a rich topic, by the way.
Yeah.
One thing I will say is that, and we've worked at this and still don't have it 100% in place, and we're still working through it. But one of the things I do think you can do versus ROI is productivity measures. Like, what are you really trying to achieve? And Alan used to talk about a single metric. So if it's if it's inside of the, sheet metal fabrication, how many pounds of metal per hour worked can we actually produce? Sometimes those metrics are more solid in understanding whether I'm getting better or worse. Productivity as a unit of what you're trying to do divided by man hours or woman hours is pretty much how I would actually say, if I'm going to go with a metric, I would lean towards that. Using a true productivity measure versus a dollar savings dollar. It's much more efficient to get an answer to where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And there are outside things that will affect that as well. So it's like I said, there's no easy math.
Yeah.
As a finance guy, that's one thing. I think you come up with something, but it's tough.
Yeah. All right. So another question comes in, in the context you talk about local teams working on improvement. But the question asks, what do you do to escalate problems that cannot be solved within the team itself? And maybe I'll add a secondary add-on to that. Well, how often is that really the case?
So I guess the first thing that we tried to do with that when thinking about it was, try to outline some parameters for the capabilities of an idea team. So, first and foremost, if it goes against the company policy in any way, if the improvement that they're coming up with goes against that policy, that would be means to escalate. Secondly, if it exceeds the budget set forth for the team, which for us is typically around $100, the team would need some approval to get that solution in place. So the escalation that I mentioned is actually a procedure that we've built out. Bob and some of our executives actually worked hard to build the escalation path out early on for this exact issue. And basically how that works is once a problem, an item exceeds the capacity, the capabilities of the idea team for the reasons we just mentioned, it gets escalated to their direct manager. That manager then has to review the suggestion, the solution suggested by the idea team. If they like it, then they approve it and they make it happen. They send it back to the team and they implement. If they don't like it, then they can't say no. They can't deny it. They have to put their notes on it, explain what their thinking is, why it's not the best solution, and they escalate it to their manager. All right. So it goes manager to manager, one step at a time, only if they don't approve it until it gets to the highest level, which is the executive team. Our president of the company sits in there, lots of executives sit in there, and they make that final decision to say, this group has put a lot of time and work into this item. They really want it, and they've made the notes of all the benefits that they're going to get from it. But here's all the notes from the managers that have reviewed it up until this point. So why don't they like it? So you asked about frequency, how often does that happen? The more teams that we have on board, the more comfortable that these teams get with the problem solving process, the more complex that their problems are getting to solve. We mentioned small problems. We're still on small problems, but we're starting to get past those lowest hanging fruits onto the next level, a little bit higher. So some of them are exceeding budgets or going against policy because teams are figuring out that you can actually do that. They have that power to ask those questions. Now, once it gets up to executive team, I will say not all of our escalations get up there. I would say most of them don't get up to executive team because our managers in place are there to help. And usually if they say no or if they don't like it, they might even be able to talk with the team to alter the idea a little bit to make something work. But by no means are we giving anybody an opportunity to just say no and squash it right there. That's something that we were really passionate about early on and we want to maintain. Bob, I know you've got something to add to that.
Well, yeah, no, I think that if solutionism has an example, it's during the escalation process where somebody will get hung up on a solution necessarily. And so one of the things we focus on is understanding what the root cause, the problem is, and then you basically will provide your best solution. And one thing about the escalation process that's a little different from that is it should go up and down the ladder. So they call it kind of staff work, putting together a business case for why I want to spend this money or why we want to change the policy on something. And so by nature, a team would take it to their manager would hopefully give them feedback and say, I see what you're trying to do here. They might have additional information that the team does not have that says, hey, have you thought about this? And feed it back. But we try to get people to kind of stay on the problem and trying to come up with the best solution as it escalates, not necessarily a, deny or approve, but more of a, hey, work with the team. Don't just send it up. If you get something from your team, circle back with them, ask questions. You might want them to flesh something out a little bit better. There's always the worry about that becoming a big spiral where I can kind of scuttle it. And so we do some things now with reporting where we're trying to track how long something sits in escalation. That's where KaiNexus is going to help us a lot with escalation, is having visibility to everyone that, hey, we have an item that's been escalated for 3 months and it just keeps going around in a circle. That's where technology can really help you with that. But yeah, the whole series, hopefully it's more of a up, down kind of moving through where you're getting better information, coming up with better ideas, better solutions potentially to it by churning it through the process.
And I think you ended up answering, unless there's anything else you want to add, that other question that had come in was what happens when management doesn't agree with an idea and it doesn't move forward? And anything else you would add kind of on that point?
I think do they agree there's a problem? It's not always the solution you're weighing. It's, do I actually have a legitimate issue? And if so, we need to deal with it. So the answer that was provided or the potential solution that was provided may not be, something that we can or can't do. We had one, I'll just tell you a story about it, where somebody wanted to put a car wash in because the problem was customers come in asking where the car washes are. And it's just, we spend a lot of time trying to explain stuff to people, and why don't we just put a car wash in? Well, the honesty of it was there's not room in the lot to actually put a car wash in. And it takes a little bit of room to stick a car wash in a lot. And so instead of saying, no, bad idea, we said, well, let's go back to the problem that you were really experiencing. So the problem is that you have customers that come in that are looking for a car wash. What if we just made some flyers up that basically had directions to the closest 3 car washes and just provided that to a customer when they asked the question? Would that be providing better customer service, keeping you from having to take, 5 minutes to explain something? And is that a solution? And so we came up with a solution to it. So I guess always circle back to the problem. Is it truly a problem? I mean, that's not a ground shaking problem. That's just a customer service. I don't want to spend 5 minutes every time somebody asks. So win-win, right? So, always focus back on the problem. And there's one thing as a continuous improvement person that I guess I can say I'm that now. The solutionism aspect of things causes a lot of issues where people get hung up on the solution and don't go back to that problem and say, okay, well, knowing what we know now, let's look back at the problem and see what we can do moving forward. And it keeps people motivated, because if you put an idea out there, this is what we should do, somebody just may not agree with it. They may not even vote on it to actually bring it down. But if you put it out as a problem and then work through it together, I think it's just a more effective way to attack improvement, and especially with small improvements.
Yeah. So maybe
it's a bad idea. There's always is it a legitimate problem or not? Sorry about that.
Well, so I was just going to ask me, my own personal follow-up question. When you talk about the idea of, well, which is the best solution? At what point do you have to go and just try things? Like if there's 2 possibilities, go test them both and see in practice which you're going to move forward with.
That's big. That's root cause analysis. A lot of times when we get into problem solving, when we peel back the root causes of a problem, we have multiple potential causes to test out. We can't rule them all out right off the bat. So we have to go try them out. So that comes with some training. That's kind of that next level of problem solving that we're getting. But you're right. Eventually teams just have to take something and run with it. So that's something we try to cover in the training to prepare them for that. Just because you come up with a solution doesn't mean it's going to be the best one, and doesn't mean it's going to solve the problem that you're dealing with. That's that's just the nature of root cause analysis. We try to make it as effective and efficient as possible, but we don't always have those answers.
Right.
So, we encourage teams to try crazy things, try new things. We're still in the learning phase. We're still trying to figure this whole thing out and get used to it. So please try new things. Anything is a good idea. All ideas are good ideas, and we can evolve on it. So that's kind of a good thing that we can spin it in our training, because you can't really fail as long as you're kind of following those 3 basic expectations of making an effort, trying to reach the best solution. You're doing right by the idea network. As we get into more of these financial things, as more quality things, that's going to come into play as well. But early on, I think we just focus on getting people comfortable and getting people more experienced in problem solving as a whole.
Yeah.
And there's 2 pieces that I'll just real quick. One, sometimes it is multiple problems and multiple root causes, and we actually ask those to break them up and put them back on the board as individuals so that they can address them separately. Because trying to do everything at once, that's where you get into big problems that take very extended periods of time. So it's the one thing I will say also that if you use KaiNexus, another shout out, but I guess there's a follow-up date that you can put on an OFI. So what we do tell people is if you're just testing this to see if it works and that it's not, it's maybe not the answer, we do ask them to set a follow-up date on that OFI when they complete it, so that they actually, OFI is opportunity for improvement. But we actually put follow-up dates on that, and that kind of triggers a reminder to say, hey, did this really work or did this not work? So I would say if it's one of those things, it's like the old when we used to do the DCFs and then never looked at them again, right? We bought something, never went back and looked at what our assumptions were.
Mm-hmm. What's a DCF?
Discounted cash flow. Of we're going to buy something, so this is what it's going to produce. And you do it when you're buying something, but then you never come back and look at it. This was kind of the improvement version of that, where, hey, we got an answer, but I'm not going to check to see if it works. We're just going to keep going with it. So yeah, that was one of the things that is helpful.
So that discounted cash flow was a hypothesis, and it's great if you never go back and check.
Exactly. But you don't know where you broke if you don't go back and check and see what you thought you were going to be doing.
Yeah. And some of this might be semantics, but I think it helps illustrate the thought process, that maybe we can call something a potential solution until we go and try it in practice and see if it was good or not. Some people don't like to say solution, but I think the mindset matters. Then, I think one other thing when it comes back to causes, one of the most powerful things I've learned from former Toyota people who had mentored me, like, think of a scenario where you ask somebody says, they announce, we found the root cause. I'm like, well, how do you know it's the root cause? Well, we talked about it and we decided that was the root cause. And
right.
People just listening on the podcast can't see Evan and Bob laughing or chuckling. Like, at best, you have a suspected root cause until you can go and test some things and see, do we really understand cause and effect?
And I think a lot of, Alan used to say, if you're not at a human error, more than likely you may not be at root cause, right? That's one of his go-tos.
Keep asking why.
Right.
Right.
Machine.
And to bring back Bob's earlier point, what is the problem we're trying to solve? A lot of times what we're seeing, teams run with action items and they put a solution in place and it solves a problem, but it's not the problem that they started with. So they're doing good work, but we need to make sure that we're sticking to what we're trying to solve here. So just always ask that question. What's the problem we're trying to solve? Do we need to break this up? That's been huge.
We do actually ask them when they're reviewing action items to read the OFI first, just to make sure that, hey, everything I'm doing actually matches back to what started this whole exercise. So.
Yeah. Great tips, great reminders. So want to thank Evan Graczyk and Bob Bell, not just for doing the Q&A today, but for doing the webinar about the power of small improvements. I'm paraphrasing what the title had been, but that's not a bad summary of it, I hope.
Exactly.
Small improvements.
All right. So thank you both for being here. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. And if you didn't check out the original webinar yet, again, look in the show notes or the YouTube description. and you'll find a link to that.
Sure. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.